I'm a professor in the English department, and I am also the director of the Ethel R. Wolf Institute for the Humanities, which is bringing you we always bring you a lot of programming, and we are one of the only entities at Brooklyn College bringing you programming while we're teaching remotely. And we at the Wolf are very excited about that. I'm here with Saklima Roy, who's our programs manager. And I want to welcome you to this event, which is part of the 2020 Hess Scholar-in-Residence, for which Winona LaDuke is our esteemed Scholar-in-Residence. And I do want to begin with land acknowledgement that refers to where Brooklyn College sits, which is on unceded territory stolen from the Canarsie Nyack people, who are subgroups of the Indigenous Lenape people. And that ongoing theft, along with the stolen blood and work of enslaved Africans, facilitates our presence here at Brooklyn College. So we pay our respects to the elders who came before us, who are here now, and who will come in the future, who have stewarded this land, and recognize the hundreds of indigenous nations who continue to resist and uphold their cultures. So I know, and we know, that this acknowledgement is neither sufficient nor complete, but it's a part of a process of learning to become more thoughtful and respectful. And having Winona LaDuke here for a week to share her knowledge with us is also part of that process. It's part of our wish for a deeper incorporation of Indigenous and Native American cultures, philosophies, and peoples into the curriculum, faculty, student body, and staff here at Brooklyn College, in line with CUNY's original mission to provide a transformative and distinctive education to the whole people of New York City. That was CUNY's original mission. So again, I want to welcome everybody. And we have one speaker this morning who is Winona LaDuke herself, our 2020 Scholar-in-Residence. And you can look up her entire bio online at brooklyn.edu/wolf, or you can just look her up on the interwebs because she'll show up. But I'll give you a little bit of information about her. She's an Anishinaabe Ojibwe rural development economist, a scholar, an activist, and a farmer, working on issues of economic, food, and energy sovereignty. So we're here today. You saw the title of this session, and you know that the term BIPOC is being used a lot these days. If your parents are like my parents, at some point they've asked you what BIPOC stands for. And there's been a legitimate focus on the B in BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color community in recent months. But the struggles of Black and Indigenous people in particular overlap. And it's not by accident that also in recent months we've seen Columbus statues coming down, and we've seen things like the football team in Washington, D.C. that has finally changed its offensive name. So this morning, we're really privileged that Ms. LaDuke is going to share with us an overview of how colonialism and racism have impacted Native and Indigenous communities in this land that we now call the USA, and how Native and Indigenous communities have continuously, actively resisted, and how they continue to thrive. And she's got some beautiful slides with us. So during her talk, please feel free to put comments and questions in the chat, and there's going to be plenty of time for discussion and Q&A afterwards. And so there's a few of us who will be keeping track of what's in the chat during that time. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to Winona LaDuke. You're muted still. Let me see if I can. There we go.
And hold on a second here. Can you hear me now? Ani Nindoe Maganaduk. Hello, my relatives. Binasi Quain Jinakaz. Makwando Dam. I'm Bear Clan, and I'm from the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota. And I don't even know if you know where that is, but there's 11 Ojibwe reservations in Minnesota, and I'm in the northern part of the state, kind of between Bemidji and Fargo, so northwestern Minnesota, way far away from y'all. But happy to be here today. I'm having a little trouble with my PowerPoint being able to put it back up. Sakima, can you help me with it? For some reason, I'm having trouble finding my share again. We'll try again. Well, as I was asked to talk about the Indigenous peoples and Black and Indigenous peoples of color in the resistance movement, I've really thought about the long history of our movement that is really largely unknown. And the reason, I think there's a lot of reasons why Indigenous people's struggles are unknown, but fundamentally, the legitimacy of Indigenous people's struggles is attached to also the legitimacy of the United States. In fact, that, of course, the United States is founded on the premise of this manifest destiny, and it was all good, and kind of the Indigenous people disappeared as people moved to the West. And so, and despite the 470 treaties that were signed, none of which have been really acknowledged or carried out by the United States as legally responsible, there's been a systematic and policy approach to make sure that Indigenous peoples are both minimized and are also able and don't exist. And so, so that's foundationally the challenge that we face. And so what has happened is that, the best way to not have a problem or not have people is say that there's no victim, so there's no crime. And I say that because Indigenous people are by and large situated far from urban areas. And, American history textbooks, most of you went to American, history class at some point. If I ask people to name 10 different kinds of Indigenous people, I don't know how y'all do on that. Like maybe not, I don't know. I can see your faces and I won't embarrass you, but the point is that most people can't. And there's 550 federally recognized tribes in the United States. There's 5,000 nations of Indigenous people on a worldwide scale. And seems like we should know a little more. But what has happened is that people, by and large, in my experience, can name a few tribes like the Lakotas or the Sioux or the Navajos. So for years, it was pretty much Native people from Westerns. That's kind of how people had a reference of Native history. And then, of course, you continue with things like the mascots. So this imagery and who we are legitimately doesn't really exist, in the American education system. And so, no victim, no crime. Don't know anything about it. And so that is why we don't appear in a lot of the in a lot of the larger discussions. Also because of the geographic separation between Indigenous nations. There are a lot of urban Indians, but a lot of our people live still in the reservation areas. And so a lot of things happen out of sight and out of mind. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. Second thing is that I think that basically when Americans think of Native people, they feel guilty, and guilt's not a really useful emotion. I don't know, I haven't found it to be particularly useful. And so what people do when they feel guilty a lot of times is they just avoid stuff. I know I'm one of those people, and so having said that, the challenges that we face are many to make sure that people understand that we're not like, although 1% of the population, we're 4% of the land base, and we have a legitimate reason to be at the table in all of these discussions. So let me talk a little bit about Indigenous people now. So Kilmo, you're going to help me with my video for my PowerPoint, because for some reason I managed to make it disappear from my screen.
It's okay. If you don't mind just saying slide and I'll.
Okay, slide. Is the first one up then, my friend?
It is.
Perfect. Okay. So this is a great photo. If you look up on Google, Lakota grandmothers burn Nazi flag. That's what you get, is this one. Now, where is this photo? This photo is taken out in North Dakota in 2013. North Dakota, the state that nobody thought about till Standing Rock. Everybody just like flew over it and said, oh, there's North Dakota. And there's a lot of things that happen when nobody pays attention to a state. So what happened out in North Dakota is that these neo-Nazis bought a town. Pretty much bought a town. How's that happen? Nobody lives in North Dakota. Everybody leaves North Dakota, moves to places like New York, Minneapolis, San Francisco, because it's cold and all, and kind of, redneck and stuff, but we won't say that. But having said that, so these towns are kind of abandoned. And this town in North Dakota was purchased by this neo-Nazi guy, and he put his flag up and everything, declared himself the mayor, and geez, the Native people there, like a lot of people out here, they're not like New Yorkers. They're timid. Did I just say that? You know how New Yorkers are? Like New Yorkers like don't take stuff. It's just like we're up in your face a little bit. Just my experience with New Yorkers, although very, very kind people. But my point is that in North Dakota, because of like all of this like learned behavior, Indian hating for years, justifying things and just kind of like, well, that's somebody else's business. They all went like this. And then the Native people were like, no, that's not going to work out. So they went and captured the flag and then they burned it. That's the Indian movement. Nobody heard about that, huh? Bet y'all didn't hear about that one, but that's exemplary of kind of like the continued struggle of our movement. So next slide, please. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a history of the Indian movement from, did you put up that next slide? I can't see it, right? Sukilma, is that right? Then the next picture is a picture of the takeover of Alcatraz in 1968. Now what I'm doing is kind of a history of the recent American Indian movement. Now I don't want to say, you know, obviously our resistance has been continuous for 500 years or we wouldn't still be here. But more than that, you know, you find that beginning in the 60s, a lot of our people started to really push back, and the pushback came because our people were forced off the reservation in a federal program called the Termination Program. And in the Termination Program and the Relocation Program, Native people were relocated to the urban areas in this resettlement program, intended to make us like all Americans and such. And so here we are now, all of a sudden, 40%, 30%. Now it's like 60 or 70% of our population is urban. Meantime, you know, what you notice as a Native person is that, oh, you don't have any land and everybody else has your land. And it turns out that the federal government is supposed to return land to Native people if it can be surplused. So there's a lot of federal land. The federal government is the largest landowner in the United States. And so, you know, and its land, how it came to own it was through taking it from Native people. And so in this case, what you got is Alcatraz Island. Now, I don't know if any of you ever been out there, but that was a former prison. A lot of our people were sent there. Al Capone, all these like, you know, serious guys, movies, The Rock are based on it, right? Anyway, they took over it. So this is some photos from the takeover. Can you please like quit flipping around on this here? You're making me dizzy on the PowerPoint. So that the takeover was in 1968, and that's in San Francisco, and it was the rise of a lot of the modern day, what was seen as the American Indian movement. Are you going back? Can you go back here, Sukilma? So you got a picture here also of John Trudell early on in that. Right, that's John Trudell at the takeover of the of Alcatraz. Let me just make you all a little smaller here, excuse me, so I can see my slides and correspond with them. I have too much computers here. Okay, the next picture I have is Sukilma, can you see what the next picture is? I'm trying to see it. That's John Trudell, and I referred y'all to this film called Trudell, which is probably the best history of the American Indian movement that I know. He passed away a couple years ago, but that guy was you know, really, he was a founder and a national chairman of the American Indian movement, and his history and his political repression that occurred, you know, including when they were burning the flag in Washington, D.C. at the FBI building, the death of his family, all in a really mysterious fire where he lost most of his family out in Nevada. Okay, next picture, come on. Thank you. Okay, American Indian movement. Now today we're talking about, you know, Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd story, you know, which is the story of people of color in urban areas, for sure. Now, as the Indian community became more urban, a lot of the Indian community moved into these major cities. One of them was Minneapolis, another was Oakland, another was Chicago, major Albuquerque, major relocation centers for Native people, Cleveland, you know, and so in the 1960s and the 1970s, what you saw is kind of the same levels of repression. And by and large, Native people are, you know, it's not like a measure who's the most oppressed, but we'll just go with that. Police repression in the cities is bad for people of color. And in the urban Minneapolis area, the targeted population was really Native people for the police repression. And so, you know, after having a lot of Native brothers like get beat up and end up in the trunk of the police car to be delivered to the police station, that's our story, you know, and a lot of other, you know, examples of kind of the brutality which we've come to know. Then what you have is the rise of the American Indian movement, and the movement itself, you know, was formed in Minneapolis, and a lot of the people in the movement were you know, from the urban area, but they we had come, a lot of them, from the White Earth Reservation. That's the reservation that I'm from. And we have the highest rate of elite relocation, the highest rate of land loss, and the highest rate of political leadership coming out. And, you know, and a lot of times I think that there's this direct relationship between repression and leadership. You know, the worse you got it, sometimes the more strong people are going to rise from there. Okay, let me have the next slide, please. In 1973, we had the takeover of Wounded Knee. Now, why do we have the takeover of Wounded Knee? Why do we pick Pine Ridge? Well, first of all, Pine Ridge, like if you look at any set of statistics nationally, you'll find that Pine Ridge is like the poverty poster child of everything that's messed up with Indian policy, continues to be. 50,000 Oglalas, a reservation of about 2 million acres, no infrastructure, continued repression, every, you know, systemic, you know, challenge of a people. And so after an increased amount of Indian hate crimes, lots of hate crimes against Indian people, you know, because you're talking about like rural white populations out of eyesight, just an acceptance, you know, of beatings, brutality, no 5-year, 6-month jail sentences for murders, non-Indian people, you know, all of this systemic problems. And so what happened is that in February of 1973, you had this takeover of what's known as Wounded Knee. And Wounded Knee is, as you may recall from your history book, the place where the 1890 massacre occurred of the Lakota people. And so we took over the church. And that was one of the largest, and so for 71 days, our people held this church. And the church, and can you show me the next picture, please? Okay, let me minimize you a little bit so I don't see you so much. Okay. Oh wait, we'll go back one. So that was the 71 days of the takeover, resulting in huge federal negotiations that, you know, then occurred, but also 144,000 rounds of ammunition brought into Wounded Knee, armored personnel carriers, really a massive repression that occurred in Wounded Knee in 1973. And so a lot of the Indian movement then became far more, you know, between Alcatraz and then the organizing in the cities, and then moving back into our reservations and into our territories to reclaim our dignity and to reclaim our security as nations. You saw increasing numbers. You know, you could see 73, you had the takeover of the novitiate up at Menominee, you had the Kinzua Dam, you had a whole set of resistance struggles that were, you know, Wounded Knee really captured a lot of the you know, minds of Americans. They say that about 70% of Americans were in support of the Native people during the Wounded Knee massacre. So, okay, next picture. Siklima. Hello, thank you. BIA takeover. Trail of broken treaties. Wounded Knee 73. Here's some more footage from Wounded Knee 73, the armored personnel carriers there. And, you know, one of the differences I think that you see early on is that, I don't know how to say this, but I feel like Native people are kind of a wild card in this. I mean, as you see, we are all hunters. We have a lot of weapons. And so I think that there's this like underlying understanding, like, that we don't know what's going to happen when the Indians get mad. I don't really know how else to put it, because like we have a pretty good set of righteous indignation going here. Next one here. Next picture, Siklima. This is from the Longest Walk, 1978. wait, go back one on the longest walk. And so Native people walked from California to Washington, D.C. to draw attention to the situation in our communities. And, part of what you see here, and I really do think that this urban-rural, urban reservation separation, the media likes to stay in New York. The media likes to go to the cities. The media doesn't like to do things until like Standing Rock in 2016. But by and large, coming out to the reservation is not something that's going to happen. And so what you see here is Native people instead taking our case to Washington, D.C. 1978, hundreds of Native people walked across the country and then walked into D.C. Next picture. Hello, next picture. Thank you. This is like some of our support. I didn't go to this. I was busy working in the Southwest, but look at, there's Muhammad Ali and Marlon Brando. Max Gale is in the back there, looks like. I don't know, Stokely Carmichael. I don't know who that other brother is back there. Okay, anyway, that's just to show you pretty widespread support. And I wish I could have been at that, but I look like a cool, it's, I don't know, maybe Stevie. Yeah, you guys figure that out for me, man. There's the cool people there. Probably Stevie Wonder. Okay, now we're seeing the wrong slide. Now we're on to a different slide. Do you want to go back to? Winona has a lag in visual. Okay, I'm going to continue on and talk about the fishing rights struggles. Oh, here we are. Y'all looking at this picture still? Okay, so I don't know if other people know who's in there. Yeah, that is Stevie Wonder, isn't it? Huh. All these cool cats from the liberation movements were there with us. I thought it was great. I didn't get to go, I stayed home. Floyd Westerman's there, that's exactly right. Buffy St. Marie, you see that? I think that is Stevie Wonder, you're absolutely right. I don't know who's behind Stevie Wonder. I do see Marlon Brando, I see Max Gale, Stokely Carmichael, Marvin Gaye. Yeah, that's Marvin Gaye, you're right. So, that's to say, maybe we should just like keep this picture out there because the solidarity between people of color is long-standing. Yeah, long-standing solidarity between people of color, Indigenous people on our struggles, and a lot of other people, of course, supporting us. So, just wanted to show you this picture of the long time ago solidarity. Okay, let's go on the next picture. Hello, Suklima. So then we have the beginning of, as Native people struggle and our struggles become international struggles, you see a lot more pressure and hate crimes at the local level. So what I'm saying here is that in 1977, I was part of the first delegation of Indigenous people to the United Nations for a UN conference on the rights of Indigenous people to the land. And that conference was really politicizing for the Native movement, and a lot of our work then moved internationally, where we allied with liberation movements on an international scale. So for instance, SWAPO, Southwest African People's Organization in what is now Namibia, ANC, African National Congress out of South Africa, Palestinians, PLO, Polisario, the people in the Indigenous people in the Sahara Desert. We allied internationally with these movements, and in that process, we also pushed ahead on our treaty rights. And so, in northern Wisconsin and the Northwest, fish are life. Fish are life. My reservation, my territory of Anishinaabe Akiing is half water and half land. And in that half water and half land world, there are a lot of fish. And that's what we do. And what had happened is that, in the process of repressing Native people in our territory, state game wardens had cracked down on our people, arresting many people, going to jail, people dying in jail for fishing. And, that would have been known to a lot of people outside of these rural areas, but the struggle over fishing rights and hunting rights, which has continued to the Supreme Court, this last year made a decision recognizing the Crow Nation's right and Indigenous rights to hunt within the Yellowstone National Park. So having said that, these struggles began to be augmented. And what you saw again is these rural people coming out when Indian people are fishing. It's called spearing, and we spear our fish in a lake in the dark with a light. It's a traditional method of harvesting. It's really an epic way to fish. And this is what our repression was like. There was a huge amount of non-Indian people coming out. There were some shots fired, but no one was killed in these struggles in the 1980s into the 1990s. And in 1999, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Ojibwe people, represented in the Minnesota versus the Mille Lacs decision is what it's called, had the right to harvest, hunt, fish, gather in the northern part of Wisconsin and Minnesota. And so the opposition, really grew. And at this time, what you have is a situation which, is a product of many things. Poor rural people with no idea that Native people have treaty rights because they never actually had a class that said that Indigenous people are not, just the Indian you kick to the side, when you go into the store. Indigenous people are people with full rights. And so what you had is a huge amount of resistance. And then you had, in addition to that huge resistance, you had these legal cases decided time after time in favor of Native people. So this is, next picture, please. So as you got, these are like white people hating on Indians. Okay, next picture. And in 1996, you had this other case of Native people again protecting our water. And this is the blockade as a 1996 action. The Bad River Reservation is on the shore of Lake Superior. And please show the next picture, Suklima. Hello? Suklima, please show the next picture.
It's up.
Oh, it's not up on my screen. Is that the one with the guys? Oh, there we are. Epic guys. Doesn't that look epic, y'all? Block the train. Block the train. And there's that little ally, Sandy Lyons, on the far right of this photo. I always like that. She said, yeah, I just got those tennis shoes. I had to wear them that day. Half these guys are still with us and half have passed on. But these are the guys. This is what Indian resistance looks like. You just block the train. And that was the battle that was won. But it took a while to defeat this mining project. They wanted to dump a bunch of sulfuric acid out and just affect our fish and our waterways. So, this Butch Stone is here towards the front. He is an epic guy. He passed on with the eagle step. And this is the picture of our Indian resistance. Next slide, please. This incurred, basically the time for the fishing rights struggles. It continues till today. We're fighting over our wild rice too, the same thing. Next picture. Oh, he found a caption. Thank you. I can't see the next one yet. Darn it. Did you put up the next picture?
Yes.
Okay, wait, I got this here. Okay, so then we have the struggle of the MigMaqs against fracking. That's an epic photo too, huh? So you don't see us because we're way out there. This is in northern New Brunswick in Canada. And I always laugh because everybody thinks Canada's all like cool. I want to move to Canada. They got free healthcare. They got all kinds of good stuff. Canada is like more repressive to Native people than even the United States. Amazing, if that is possible. But this is a battle against a fracking company. Y'all know what fracking is, I assume, which is the extreme extraction of oil from the subsurface through blowing up the bedrock of Mother Earth and putting a bunch of chemicals down. MigMaq opposed that. These fine RCMP, that's who the officers are, Rural Canadian Mounted Police in Canada, are protecting a Texas fracking company in MigMaq territory. A lot of brutality occurred there. In the end, the MigMaqs won that battle, and but blood was let. The MigMaqs won the battle, and the fracking company is no longer. Next slide, please. Canadian police protecting an American company, exactly. The next slide, please. Thank you. And then this is what people have come to know as the Standing Rock, the No DAPL battle. And in this battle, what you see here is, again, $38 million worth of military repression against Native people who want to protect their water. We're water protectors. I'm a water protector. And in that moment, this is a Native woman looking at a lot of military. And it was, I spent a lot of time at Standing Rock, and this is a battle over the Dakota Access Pipeline. And originally the pipeline was proposed to go north of the city of Bismarck, which is 95% white. And the city of Bismarck said, oh, we feel like our water might be at risk. And so they put it south of the city of Bismarck, just north of the Standing Rock Reservation. And the pipeline was coming at the people of Standing Rock from two directions. And the last place to cross was the Missouri River, which is where this standoff occurred. And this photo is from about October of 2016, so 4 years ago, on the Standing Rock Reservation. Next picture. The people who, this is really the water protector battles that continue. We were all, initially in my first round of the battle, we were called protesters. I said, we're not protesters, we're protectors. Protesters would imply something different, but this is a woman who got sprayed. I don't know what she got sprayed with, but this is what it looked like to be a woman at Standing Rock in 2016. Next picture. Another picture is from Standing Rock. Heavy militarization, $38 million worth of militarization. Military forces used on our people. And this is people actually waiting across the river to try to get to the place where the pipeline is proposed to go through. Next one. These are some more photos from Standing Rock. Saklima, did you put up the next photo? Thank you. And so what I wanted to show here, which is kind of what we've seen more recently with the deployment of the National Guard. This is early on, but the United States has surplus military equipment to civilian police forces. And so if you look at the equipment, the piece of equipment on the right is called an MRAP. It's a intended to drive through a building. And it says Stutsman County on it if you look at it. And Stutsman County has about 5,000 people in pretty much no building that you would require that for. But it was surplus to Stutsman County. And the second piece of equipment on the left is called an LRAD, long range acoustic device, which is intended to blow out your eardrums. And so a lot of us had ear protective gear on. But, you know, this is a larger question, I believe, in this society of mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle. Thank you. This is a lot of, you know, this problem in civil society when you can military surplus for civilian use a bunch of equipment which should not be used on civilians, and particularly in rural North Dakota. Next picture, please. I can't see it yet. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this next set of photos is really about missing and murdered Indigenous women. One of the reasons that people don't know much about us is a lot of us are missing. We'll go with that description. So having said that, you know, over the past decades, you know, rape is a war crime, and rape has been used a lot on Native women historically and to this day, and thousands of Native women have been kidnapped and disappeared. And so this is kind of this red hand mark is the sign of the missing and murdered women's battle. And you know, so for the past, you can put the next slide up. And so for the past, I'd say 10 years, this is in Canada, and it just shows you the disproportionate levels of death by Native, you know, of Native women in Canada. And it's, you know, a lot of the things that I'm talking about here are both Canada, the United States, because that's, you know, the North American continent of Indigenous people, and the statistics are largely applied across. You know, that's to say that I call North Dakota, Minnesota the deep north, and that deep north extends into Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And basically the statistics that you see in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta are very similar to the statistics you see in North Dakota, Montana, Minnesota. Next picture. And so this is, you know, another example of our struggle against femicide, but it is something that doesn't see a lot of light of day. This is a billboard out in North Dakota that was taken up. This is actually taken up by non-Indian people, you know, who had the same, you know, had the same concerns because of sex trafficking in the Bakken oil fields. There's a high intersection, there's an intersection between fossil fuels and mining projects and sex trafficking and sexual violence. Next picture, please. I don't know what that picture is. Maybe we need to go to the next picture. This is an event we did. And, you know, in our resistance, we have all kinds of strategies, but we have a lot of puppets in art. And these are the battles over the tar sands pipelines. So this is a picture from last October 11th in Clearbrook, Minnesota, which is, and what you see is a tank farm from the Enbridge Corporation. The previous picture and this picture are both about the battle of the Anishinaabe to oppose the Enbridge pipeline. And, you know, our struggle is largely rural. People do not see us in this town, Clearbrook, super conservative town in the North Country in the deep North. And we brought our people into that town, brought our people to the tank farm. A lot of opposition, you know, by the white people up there, but our water protectors are courageous, we're fearless. And, you know, I invite you all to come visit. That's what I'd say, because the deep North needs love. The deep North needs love. And this is, you know, some of the work that we've been doing in the North. Next picture, please. And this is in Canada, a similar pipeline battle. This is the Wetsuetan battle to protect their land from, these are Canadian multinationals. These are not American multinationals. The Canadian multinationals, you know, Canada has 75% of the world's mining corporations are Canadian. The tar sands companies are Canadian, and the pipeline companies are Canadian. And so the resistance is to Canadian multinationals. And in northwestern Canada, up in northern British Columbia, there's some people called the Wetsuetan people who have been fighting a pipeline there for years and still resist this pipeline, which is coming from the fracking fields of northern British Columbia and Alberta down towards Vancouver. And so it's the Wetsuetan struggle. I did refer you to some information, I believe, in the reading list on it. But you know, the challenge of the many challenges that Indigenous people face, if you're geographically isolated in northern British Columbia in a pitted battle against a giant oil pipeline company, nobody knows because you're so far remote, you know, and the use of media, the use of Facebook has really strengthened our movements. And at the same time, it's really important that we look at how movements build solidarity, because we're not in the urban areas. But this is a solidarity march, I think, in downtown Vancouver, British Columbia, to support the Wetsuetan people in our struggle against the pipeline. And across Canada, all spring, there were major battles and major demonstrations to support the Wetsuetan people in opposing that pipeline. You can put the next slide up when you are ready, Zuklima. And this is another example of the struggle. So what happened in 2019 into 2020 was blockades of the railroads in Canada. Now, someone is asking me why the pipeline is harmful. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about pipelines if we're getting these kind of questions. Let's just go with that you have pristine water, and that's all you have. And a major multinational corporation with a case of 800 leaks wants to put a pipeline across your territory so that it can basically export that oil to make a profit by selling it to China. That's the basic problem with this. You know, it's called Windigo economics, the last of the oil in a time of climate change. And so Indigenous resistance is really key in the struggle on climate justice, and is really key and critical in environmental struggles. And yet, you know, what you find is by and large, Native people's struggles are not really financially supported. I mean, you know, in comparison to the big environmental groups in North America, we have just a pittance of money, but we are very, very resilient, and we have a lot of allies. And so what you see here is blockades. You saw the blockade of the train in northern Wisconsin a few slides back. These are blockades that occurred last winter and spring in Canada in solidarity with the land rights and the struggle of the Wetsuetan against the pipeline project. And that's a pretty interesting strategy and a pretty significant one. And it turns out, you know, there's a couple reasons of the significance of this, but railroad right-of-ways were basically run right across Native territories. And so these are also not all Native communities, but there's a lot of blockades that occurred in solidarity. And so, you know, part of what I am hoping that you get out of this lecture is an understanding of the geographic separation. And, you know, our struggles are as significant as everyone else's struggles. It's just that most Americans don't have the bandwidth to understand or experience to understand kind of the North American political context of these natural resource battles and environmental and human rights battles. And so the geographic isolation has separated us, but we are clearly at the table. Next slide, too, when you get a chance. The mascot battle. This is something that, you know, people wouldn't think about, but I don't know if people would think about, but this is the team formerly known as the Washington Redskins. That was a 20-year battle to get them to change their name. And the momentum that was caused by the death of George Floyd is one of the many things that has happened as a result of that tragedy. And that momentum caused, I believe, the Redskins owner, Dan Snyder, to change his name, you know. But this is what it is to be a Native person in 2020, is you go someplace and you see some white guy dressed up and pretending he's Indian. It's really, you know, there's a lot of psychological studies of the impact of that on Native kids. And I just, you know, as an adult woman, I am so disappointed in these men and disappointed in these systems, but they are changing. Okay, next picture, please. This is one of my favorite recent pictures. This is the falling of the Columbus statue in Minneapolis, or St. Paul at the state capitol. You see that graphic there? That's Frank Perro from the American Indian Movement, who did the final toppling. I think he had a little help. He's not that strong of a guy. But that, you know, there you go. We're down. And across this country in the past 3 months, I've seen more statues of vilified and hated people topple than I could have ever believed would happen. And I am so encouraged and so liberated. You know, I wrote an article. I said we should just set up a garden of shame. They could put those statues someplace like a garden of shame, so we could all go look at them and see why they're there and not where they used to be. And you know, maybe we replace them with some Native people or some other people of awesome, you know, history, the people's history. That's what I'd also like to see. But you know, it's you know, there was a lot of, like, not a lot of pushback, but there was pushback like we're erasing history. And I think that Nick Estes, the Lakota historian, said, he's a historian, he said, let me just excuse me. Erasure is when you live in a place and you don't know the people who are there. You don't know whose land it is. You know nothing about their history. That's erasure, not taking down a statue of Christopher Columbus. So next picture, please. This is my last slide. But this is what happened to one of the Columbus statues. That's in Detroit. And those women are jingle dress dancers and fancy shawl dancers. And I thought that was just epic. I thought that's just epic that that woman got up there, you know. And, you know, I'm just really proud of our movement. And the picture on the right is a brother dancing on the statue, on the foundation of what was the statue of Don Juan de Oñate. And Oñate was a conquistador from Spain, obviously, who subjugated indigenous people in the Southwest in his pursuit of gold, and was ruthless and brutal. And when there was an uprising, he cut off the foot of, I think, 30 Acoma Pueblo men. He cut their feet off, 1 foot off. And so that statue still stood, you know, for so many years in north of Santa Fe and also in Albuquerque, although there was so much resistance to it. In the early part of this century, like 2005, I believe, some indigenous people cut Oñate's foot off at the statue, which I thought was quite appropriate. But they patched him back up. But in June of 2020, the Oñate statue was removed, all of them. And this young man, he said, I'm going to do what my ancestors couldn't do. I'm going to dance. And so he's dancing where the statue was. So that is a little bit about our resistance and a 40-year quick update. I'm happy to answer some questions, and I'm going to try to make my screen work again. Thank you. I apologize. We had a little moment there. Oh, there you are. Nice to see you.
But we made it through. Thank you so much for such a broad overview of some really important moments in Indigenous activism and resistance. What I'm going to do, I've been keeping track of the questions that came in through the chat, and I'm going to pose a few of them together, and you can kind of answer them in concert. And that will give people a minute to get together their other questions, which they can either put in the chat or they can digitally raise their hand, and we'll get to those in the next round. So from Selena Lambert, we have a question about what is the dominant narrative when it comes to racial injustice relative to Native and Indigenous people? And from Mary Grace Scott, we have a question. Do you think that if there was more media coverage, that changes, such as the changes that you ended with, would be made faster? Let's start with those two.
Yep. Okay. So what do you mean by the dominant narrative? Like, am I saying we want justice, we want reparations, we want an apology, we want land back, we want to be treated as first-class citizens in the world? Is that the narrative I'm talking about?
Selena, you can unmute yourself and clarify your question.
Please help me, Selena.
Hi. What I meant by the question I was asking was that what is the dominant narrative in, I guess, the public eye? For what would you say would be the dominant narrative?
I'm not sure, because the lens through which I look is my own, but it seems to me that, by and large, I think that a lot of people, whoever they are, really support Native people, because they know that we got a bad gig here going on, and we're still hanging in, and what we want back is our land and our justice and our dignity and our economies and our languages. We can make a long list, and I think that basically there is widespread support for Indigenous peoples across this continent. We face, though, and when they control the narrative, one, these multinational corporations, which call us protesters, and act as if somehow it's like come out of I don't know, why do they oppose a pipeline? What's wrong? Did they miss the memo? That's kind of what I feel like. And then there's also, the narrative that occurs in these rural areas. I live in the deep north, and, the discussions up here that, Trump pro line 3 is just rampant. So there's different narratives. And in the local area, there's a lot of justification of appropriation and theft. Indian people really don't deserve that. We're like them. We're equal. Everyone should be equal. So there's a lot of racism, in where I live, where we live. Then, the other question is on the media. Yes. As a young activist and writer, I remember writing a story it was In These Times is who I wrote the story for, which is like a progressive publication. And the year was probably 78 or 1980. And, I was writing about uranium mining and relocation of Native people for coal strip mining. And I remember In These Times told me they couldn't publish another story because they'd already done one, last month. And so there was this kind of Native people should only have press sometimes because we're really not that significant, and I think that has been a dominant narrative in even white progressives. And it continues to be a dominant, discussion of well, they're only 1% of the population, so who cares? And I was like, we're all breathing the same air and all drinking the same water. And if we don't stop those guys, you're going to be sorry, so I feel like that more media is really going to be important. And then also Lincoln, I try to give you a summary of kind of our resistance over these 40 years. And there is a parallel summary of other people's struggles that, that shows this complexity and beauty of movement history. And I think that telling those stories and showing how they're linked, and that I've loved it when you guys were like Stokely Carmichael and Marvin Gaye. I forgot that was Marvin Gaye in there. That was so great. But it shows this solidarity. That was from 1978. You know, that picture was 1978. So long time solidarity, you know, of these movements. So, okay, I don't know. Other questions, happy to answer.
There are other questions. So we have a question from Angelica about has there been any change to how protests are happening since the pandemic began? And then we had a couple questions around natural resources and how do you connect natural resources like fishing and water to racial injustice?
Okay, so during the pandemic, I think that, you know, we're pretty rural, and so there is definitely, this push to, like, it's not safe to gather, and to which we point out that it's not safe to bring in 4,200 workers for a pipeline, is it? Right? You know, when we wrote a letter to the governor of Minnesota and said, you approve that project, you're going to bring 4,200 workers into the state during a pandemic, expect 10,000 water protectors and then deal with the health consequences of that one, right? I mean, you know, we will meet their projects with more people because they have the money, but we have the people, you know? And just keep that in mind. If you got the people, just stand tall. You know, that's what we think, you know? And so during this pandemic, you know, I know that we are continuing our work, and a lot of our enemies have had to slow down because they're losing money. You know, so for instance, my major, corporation that I'm fighting is Enbridge, the third largest corporation in Canada. A pipeline company wants to put a tar sands pipeline, the biggest one through my territory. 7-year battle. And you know what I saw at the beginning of this year is Enbridge lost $1.4 billion. You know, couple pipelines got canceled. The Constitution pipeline got canceled in New York. Stock value drops. They lay off 500 people. You know, companies are going bankrupt. And so what I find is that my enemy is weakening during COVID and during the pandemic. My enemy is weakening, but my people are standing strong. You know, so I don't know what to tell you, but that's like my experience in my battle here. You know, and we just mask up. I mean, people were saying, like, I mean, Minneapolis is 4 hours from me. People masked up. You know, and people said they were really worried that there was going to be this surge out of the riots in Minneapolis. There was no surge out of the riots in Minneapolis. You know, the surge was after the Sturgis motorcycle rally. Right? That's a totally different demographic, right? All right. So
yeah, we got sorry, go ahead, finish.
Okay, no, and then a larger question on the natural resources. I mean, you know, human rights, right to water, you know, really basic. And the thing, one of the main distinguishing factors is Indigenous people are like other Indigenous peoples and liberation movements internationally because we're landed peoples. And so because of that, we're fighting to protect our land base. And protecting our land base is inherently a human right. And it's a part of not only our sovereignty, but our survival.
Great, thank you. Enrico, would you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, I can ask my question. I just made a lot of connections with a lot of things you said, especially we watched a video prior to this meeting, and you talked about generational trauma in the Native American experiences. I often find similar traits in the Black and African American communities. I don't want to make, false conjectures here, but do you feel as though as an active activist, do you feel like these, I don't want to step out of my, do you feel like these are actual implements just to just separate us and just to negate a political unification of colored and Native American people as an activist? Because I feel as though that this may be an implementation just to cease a unification. Do you feel that for yourself?
I feel like since George Floyd, all those barriers are breaking down. You saw all kind of Native people down there in the cities, you know? We're both protecting our businesses because we have it's not like Memphis, the Black Wall Street, but Minneapolis is pretty much the urban Indian infrastructure in the United States. And, you know, so we have people out protecting our businesses because it wasn't, as you know, it wasn't our people looting. a lot of times that looting was like in the case of Minneapolis, a bunch of white supremacists. And so there was that. And then our people were right in the streets with all our Black brothers and sisters on this, because we had this long experience in Minneapolis of having Indians stuffed in the back of police cars in the 60s. So we was with you, you know? And so there's definitely a shared experience. And it's it's also this, you know, opportunity as we push forward. You know, I just say keep on pushing because statues are falling, you know. So now is definitely the time to not only remove those barriers, force changes in police, force changes in policies, but also build the next world, the one that we want. You know, I'm saying let's just do that and work together, because you know, we're not going to be urban, and you guys got the numbers we don't got, but we're all on one team.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Enrico, and the response, Winona. Would Simone please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi. First of all, I want to say it's really great to be here. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I feel like really honored talking to you right now. So my question is, do you believe the pandemic will cause like a shift in the consumption of other people's materials? I was watching a video of you and you were talking about how we need to shift from using other people's materials and like investing in our own. So do you think like in an economy where like people of color are like systemically oppressed in the economy specifically, like how do we make that shift to like investing in our own goods?
We are. No time like the present. Transitions now. Yesterday, I was quoting Arundhati Roy, who talks about pandemic as portal. You know, saying you want to drag all that hatred, avarice, you know, pollution through, or you want to walk through clean. I'm saying walk through clean. This is our opportunity. Systems are so, you know, I mean, y'all know. All these systems are destabilized because they don't work. And they don't work for a whole number of reasons that we know, but also they don't work because they're big centralized monolithic systems of concentrated power. And that doesn't work when you got to be agile and change, you know? And so what you see now is these systems are totally, you know, falling apart. So now's the time to make the next system. Make the better one. And so that's what we're doing. Like in Minnesota, we got, you know, I may talk about it in my later lectures, but solar, you know, renewable energy, food systems, political changes, all of those things are definitely underway. And I'm not sure if I'm going to give a full lecture on the cannabis economy, but that's one of the things that I think is the future, because I'm a hemp grower. You know, I grow fiber hemp. And what I know is that it's the new green revolution, and everybody, particularly people of color, should be at the table, owning dispensaries as well as, you know, growing. It's a whole new economy, and we need to be the people at the table in that economy, and it's happening. So just keep pushing. But that's just one. You know? Yeah,
and we have a related question to that from Professor Wills, who asks, can you elaborate on what we can learn from Indigenous economics in this moment when capitalism is going a little crazy? And I know you're going to talk more about this on Thursday, but maybe you can talk a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the basic picture, like if I said that a leader, I don't know if I said this yesterday, but a leader is recognized not for how much they accumulate, but for how much they give away. Well, that's like a fundamental transformation of an economic system, isn't it? You know, if it's not about you amassing wealth, you know, because the capitalist economic system is about that. You know, it is about not, you know, and so it fundamentally in our, you know, you don't even have a word for economy in our language up here. You have how we live. I thought that was really interesting when I asked my father-in-law. You know, there's like the white man job, and then there's how we live. You know, and so to me, part of what we're looking at is how you transform economies to be reaffirmation or restorative, not extractive. That'd be foundational, is a good plan. You know, and that goes from your kids, your little dudes, your child care programs, you know, to your adults. I mean, we're basically shipping people off to institutions from birth to death. And that has huge, you know, implications for quality of life and for our communities. And you know, so foundationally, you know, you got to look at that. like, you know, our healthcare. Why is healthcare the largest growing industry in the country? Because we're sick. Is that an indicator of wellness? No, it's an indicator of profit and illness. So, you know, a lot of facets, you know, from being healthy, you know, and living in a good life to how you structure your economy and be adaptive and respect your relatives. Those are all fundamental aspects. And I'll probably be talking about more of that later on this week.
And you know, you mentioned the little ones, and I know you have little ones over there by you. We have two questions kind of related to education. From Melissa, we have, how do we fight the lack of education or poor education that leads to ignorance? And Melissa talked about, you know, how they were taught that Columbus was this great person and now they're learning something different. And we have Annette who asked a question about wondering if you can talk about how racial stereotyping affects Indigenous children.
Yeah, I mean, the racial stereotyping, to start with, I mean, the mascot issue is like exemplary of that, you know, because you're no longer, you're dehumanized and you're like an object and then you're a mascot. So you're something that you dress up as. And it's really, you know, I mean, not a lot of people do blackface these days, you know, but people still dress up like Native people, you know, Pocahontas, the whole gig. And so there's this, you know, creation of this mythology that we're not really real people. We're things that we need to dress up as, right? And in addition to that, you know, a lot of that, I mean, we are so, you know, so marketed in the media in kind of those realms, from, you know, even like some of these big fashion shows, like Victoria's Secret got trashed a couple of years ago for like having somebody like, you know, in their beautiful little lingerie, like with a big headdress on and like dressing up like a Native person. I was like, you know, so it's consistent. It's consistent, you know, and it's something that we oppose and we rankle against. You know, as far as how you broaden this education, you know, that's going to take school by school and classroom by classroom. You know, and it's going to take work of committed individuals to deconstruct, you know, the history mythology of this country. And then also, you know, to look at, you know, these facets that are, you know, because the other thing about Native people, not the other thing, but one of the many other things about Native people is that a lot of people view us as in the past and not existing in the present. And that, you know, we just got to blow that myth out. I mean, the National Poet Laureate is Joy Harjo, you know, a Muskogee Creek woman. She's the poet laureate, not appointed by Trump, of course, but appointed, you know. I think the Library of Congress appointed her, you know, so, you know, we are very present, you know, and we're gonna, you know, I was gonna say we're gonna get out the boat too, so you'll see us more present.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one last round of questions. And
yeah.
we have, let's see, we have a question from Professor Schiller about just wanting you to say a little bit more about violence against women in relationship to the man camps. And we have a question from Ronaldo about why is it that Indigenous people are not given the credit that they deserve. It sounds like folks are learning a lot today.
Yeah, you know, and there's a lot of writing, and I don't know if I'm talking later this week more about the man camps, but, you know, essentially what you have is, you know, construction man camps full of these guys. And throughout North Dakota is where you saw the rises in rapes and missing and murdered and sex trafficking, not just Native women, but, you know, a lot of times we're far more at prey because we're located near to where these man camps are. You know, and it's a long historic practice of raping Native women by colonizers. And so it's become, you know, almost acceptable, I think, in some of these areas. And so it's continued, you know, and that's why you have those statistics which are so egregious. And they are associated with these resource extractive mining and pipeline projects at a higher rate. So that's, you know, an answer to that. And there's a lot of writing. I think I've given you a couple of references in the reading materials on that. And there's far more. There's so much writing about it in this day and age that it is a good. What was the other question?
what was the other question? I think it was partly a comment on the fact that Indigenous people are not getting their...
Oh, credit. Oh, yeah. You know, I was talking to these guys, like I'm giving a lecture to like a multinational agricultural company. And they were like, oh, I was talking to them yesterday, like, you know, we're getting sued. I was like, yeah, I do. And so they still want me to talk to them. And I said, let me just tell you this. How about this? Take these words, nawaddle, chocolatl, potatl, and tomato. Right? Y'all hear those words? Those are nawaddle words. And that's for 4 of the main things. I mean, avocados, potatoes, tomatoes, and chocolate. I mean, come on, give us a little credit. Western hemispheric in origin, the foundation of cuisine on a worldwide scale. And that's like an example of like, no credit for that one, no credit for that one, you know? And so I think that part of, you know, this moment of critical thinking and relearning history is from our food to our political institutions. I mean, Americans had no idea how to run a democracy. The Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy is who ran one. And that's where Benjamin Franklin and all those guys went to study up, you know, foundationally to history and to the present territory, you know, time, you know, out of sight, out of mind, you know, we are so present. And you just got to turn your lens a little bit and you know, we're all in the same battle. We're all in the same battle, and we all have contributed so much to this world that we don't get credit for. But, you know, Indigenous peoples certainly deserve to have more recognition for our work in so many arenas. And so I encourage you to follow up.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. And we have Mary Grace in the comments giving you credit and saying thank you for not only taking the time to discuss with us, but for actively changing the world that we live in. And so if folks can give, you can give your digital applause, you can give your applause like
really
this.
Fun. Look at this.
And hopefully everyone learned a little bit more about the I in BIPOC today. So we have other events happening this afternoon. We have civil rights and resistance uprisings for planetary justice. And we have events throughout the week. So please come back, keep registering for events. And thank you so much for coming and for your attention and for your wonderful questions. Take care.
Miigwech.